Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. Today on this episode I'm going to be taking a look at the 2009 movie Surrogates, starring Bruce Willis. Now, this has a tomato meter score of 37% and an audience score of 38%. Both critics and audience seem to agree this is rotten. This movie is now 10 years old as of this video. So I'm going to ask the question, why did it age so badly, perhaps? Because I recall enjoying this movie when it came out. This movie may have been it may have been mismarketed as some kind of action flick. Certainly, maybe it came across to people as promising a Bruce Willis action flick of some kind, but that's not what it really delivered. It was more of a thriller, mystery, sci-fi premise exploration. Um, it's definitely not just a straight-up Bruce Willis action movie, and so that might be partly responsible for the bad audience score, but let's get right into it and see what we can find. We have a 4-star review, current September 27th, 2019. The idea is there, it really is. Big Bruce Willis fan. I actually enjoyed this, but anything sci-fi is a must for me. I wouldn't say 4 stars. If I had to put a star rating, I would say this could be a 3-star. It would peak at 3 stars. I'm kind of wavering between 2.5 and 3 stars, just based on the fact that I think the later half of the movie, it doesn't really maintain the tension. It doesn't deliver quite as much as it should have. So I'll say 3 stars to be fair. Let's continue. Here we have 5 stars. I cannot for the life of me the low ratings this movie received. It's speculative fiction at its finest. The extremely logical progression from a surrogate-free world to a surrogate-filled world is stunning. The only shortfall of the movie is the illogical use of cell phones that are not built into the surrogates. I'll agree with that, not the star rating. The premise itself is difficult. You've got most of society, they are shut-ins, they don't leave the house. They only leave the house inside the android bodies that they inhabit in a virtual way. So you would have to, explain why they're still carrying cell phones when the cell phones can simply be built into the surrogates. It's one of those plot things that develop in your mind if you try to question this too much. I don't think that's why the reviews are bad, though. I think the reviews are bad, in my opinion, because people were expecting a straight-up action movie and they didn't get that. There are other problems with the surrogates that we can get into a little bit later, if you want to talk plot holes. 3.5 stars. I know I may be alone in this opinion, but I liked this flick. It was different. I'll admit the development wasn't perfect, but it made a lot of good points. When you think of smartphone use today, or should I say overuse, I've seen my niece and her husband ignore me and their children at the dinner table to play a video game together on their phones, which was rude and bad for the kids, since both parents work and this is their only family time. The plot also reminds me of one of my favorite stories. Yeah, there is a lot of comparison here between how technology has made us more disconnected. That's definitely a theme in the movie. That was an intentional theme. It might even be the driving theme of this movie, that in our quest to make our lives easier and greater through technology, we've made ourselves completely disconnected from each other. And that's seen in the relationship between Bruce Willis's character and his wife. That's one of the actual subplots. He's completely estranged from his wife, and he doesn't find out just how estranged from her he is until he cannot use his surrogate, and he has to go out into the world and do his police work without his surrogate body. And he's like up against regular people, bad guys and not, that just by the fact that they've got surrogates and he doesn't, he is completely overpowered and disconnected even further. So we'll move on here. 3.5 stars. Cool movie with a great premise and interesting story. good action and lots of creative sci-fi aspects. It also has major flaws and could have been better in many ways. I thought about giving it a 3.0, but I find it very entertaining and I love the sci-fi-ness, and I see myself watching it again, about 3 viewings. I'll largely agree. I don't think it's like up to 4 stars, but I think it's, if you expect this to explore its opening premise, it does. It's not a Bruce Willis action vehicle. You get a little bit of action, but this isn't a Die Hard movie by any means. 5 stars, 38% are crapping me Rotten Tomatoes. Geez, this movie seems more plausible in 2018 than ever. Solid sci-fi movie, and Bruce Willis is tough. Get it together, RT. Again, I think they're arguing with the audience and the critics on this. Um, Again, I'm going to maintain I think it's because this movie might have promised a Bruce Willis action vehicle and it didn't deliver that. 1.5 stars. This is pretty watchable, and the opening 30 minutes showed a promising idea, then turned it into a Terminator 3 movie with lots of action and very little flair. I don't get the comparison to Terminator 3 at all, so I'll move on. 5 stars. One of my favorite movies, thoughtful and well done, and creating a world that is not outside the realm of possibility according to futuristic shows such as Year Million. Okay. 3 stars. Had it embraced the esoteric questions about human nature and empathy buried in the premise more fully, it could have been a more interesting piece. As it is, it's a serviceable Bruce Willis action vehicle with some recent performances. It's the same concern as Will Smith's I, Robot, another movie with a great premise delving into human nature and mind-machine interfaces and their impact on our future social evolution as a species. I get the reference to iRobot only in that they were both released around the same time. iRobot, though, I think completely fails in what the original material of iRobot was delivering to book readers. iRobot had a message. It kind of failed to execute that. Became a Will Smith action vehicle that also kind of failed to entertain as that. I would consider this movie more entertaining than iRobot, more effective than iRobot, and it's not like trying to be an action movie. It might have promised that in a trailer, I don't know, but it didn't try to do that as a movie, so it didn't fail at that. I really resent somebody that would tell me, I resent the opinion that iRobot would be in any way better than this movie. It's definitely not. 4 stars. I liked this film. I liked the theme of how technology is taking over everyone's lives. Cool robot stuff. In other words, it was a typical action movie. You're saying 2 different things there, so I disagree. 4.5 stars. This movie is really not that bad. Actually, I really liked the unique plot, and Bruce Willis really does what he can and is great for the role. I was positively surprised after watching it, and I can watch it over again since then. It's not the biggest epic sci-fi movie, but definitely worth to watch. I'll say one thing, the villain, the kind of plot twist mystery in the villain and what was happening there, I thought that was very well done, except it didn't have enough tension. It didn't have the big landing at the end I felt it should have had. That's why I just barely consider this 3 stars. To me, it was great, but the ending it just fell a little flat at the end. But let's move on. 2 stars. It's a good movie to watch. 2 stars. Interesting premise, but doesn't stand up to any logical scrutiny. Cliche plot. Horrible writing and script. Plays out like a high school writing assignment. Some interesting sets, effects, and visual design. Doesn't save it. 2.5 stars. A little slow moving at times, but a decent enough sci-fi movie. 3 stars. It's entertaining for a B movie, much like others such as iRobot, etc. Nothing really special, but not really bad either. Again, I don't consider this comparable to iRobot. 4 stars. A very underrated hidden gem. A great concept and entertaining movie about over-reliance on technology. Yeah. 4.5 stars. Loved this movie. It wasn't about how well done the movie is. It's about the story. Love the story. It's much love. My favorite book, Feed. Okay. 3 stars. Like most films in this genre, it has a good idea but fails to make any of its ideas work or feel fresh, mostly down to the story being told poorly and really doesn't know where to take the story, so it uses an ending that was predictable. The effects were good and some nice action scenes, but that's it really. Willis does his best to try and save the film, but even he can't help it feeling like an iRobot knockoff. I disagree with the iRobot. I don't get that vibe. But maybe that's why the audience score suffers. Maybe I'm the outlier and everybody else does compare this to iRobot. But let's continue. 2.5 stars. Despite some cool moments and innovative touches, the film sacrifices plausibility in the details to its big picture, which is unfortunately quite bland. One man saving humanity from itself with seconds to spare. As a loosely AI-based sci-fi, it lacks the depth and intelligence of Ex Machina, Existence, or even The Matrix, and is really just another action flick. It basically rehashes the old utopia becomes dystopia, fear of technology shtick that has been the mainstay of box office sci-fi from day one. Okay, I can kind of agree with that. If you think that it's just rehashing that, technology turns out to be the big bad, then yeah, that's in the general sense, that's been done a billion times before, so I largely agree. 2 stars. Though some scenes are pretty tense and tightly filmed, it's overall short, empty, and rides on just its quick fixes for action, barely passable, only for specific junkies. I don't completely disagree, but I say this hits the 3-star mark, though, just barely. 3 stars, not great, but not bad. Okay, we agree. We are into 2015 reviews here. 2.5 stars, rather optimistic movie. Not really. 2 stars, Spanish. 4 stars or 3.5 stars. It doesn't surprise me that Surrogates was passed over by critics. To compound the sad state of the American movie review industry these days, Surrogates had too little hype, and Bruce Willis was and is still on a low streak. Despite all of this, Surrogates really stands out. It has the feel of District 9 and iRobot put together, combining a slick science fiction premise with thought-provoking questions of humanity and a few excellent plot twists. Bruce Willis gets to shine, in large part because he gets to be, okay, yeah, I don't disagree. 3 stars. Bruce Willis is badass in this movie, but everything else is kind of dumb. Some of it is kind of dumb. I mean, another nitpick I could say is, well, you have all of society being a shut-in, essentially. We know shut-ins. We know that, they go on an online game and they never leave the house. That's what a shut-in might be. But we still know they're biological beings. People still need to go to the bathroom. They still need to eat. They still need to actually sleep for real. So the movie kind of glosses over and ignores all that and just kind of allows it up to our imagination how people are taking care of their bodily functions and etc. At the end of the movie, it's just briefly shown that, when all of society gets unplugged at one time and they start, wincing from the sunlight, so to speak, and come out of their shut-in lives. They come out in their pajamas. They've been in their pajamas for years. It still kind of glosses over the reality of it. You would again have a society that, since none of these actual surrogate androids that people are using in the real world actually have bodily functions, they don't need to eat, for example, that would completely get rid of restaurants and cafes, for example. And yet in the film, you see restaurants and cafes briefly, along with other scenery in the city, which wouldn't make sense. That's a plot hole, because why would you run a restaurant when all the surrogates out walking on the street don't eat food? That doesn't make a lot of sense. There are other things, once you nitpick it, but I'll agree it's dumb in that the movie just glosses over what are the other implications of people just all being shut-ins. It would be a lot more, just aside from the cell phones, it would be a lot more plot hole-ish, if you will, if you get into that. 2 stars. It's a mediocre sci-fi movie that had the potential to be a much better movie. I see all kinds of missed opportunities where they could have twisted the plot around to make it a much better storyline. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about the ending. They could have done it better. 3.5 stars. Personally loved it, but so many people hated it. Love a bit of Willis. Well, if people hated it, I'm wondering if that's not like their own psychology. They're kind of rubbed the wrong way because maybe a lot of these people spend too many hours sitting in a chair playing Call of Duty or whatever. So yeah, it might kind of rub them the wrong way because it's reminding them a little bit too much of themselves. That's a theory. 3 stars, kind of like The Sims, only worse. Still not stopping me wanting a surrogate, though. Yeah, it's like The Sims, or, what was that thing called? Sim Life, or there's a lot of plays on this in the video game world, virtual worlds. But yeah, the just the flat temptation. If you offered me a surrogate, I would have a lot of uses for it, especially if I could feel things through the surrogate in a virtual reality sort of way. But again, thinking about what would happen to my body if I became a shut-in, yeah, the negatives outweigh the positives in a lot of ways. But it's tempting. It is very tempting. The premise itself is tempting, and that gets you into the movie. 2 stars. Surrogate sees a world where humans stay at home and control their robot from the comfort of never leaving the house. Soon people are killing them off while also killing the user, and Bruce Willis must work out what is happening before he is killed himself. Yeah, synopsis. That's the hook of the movie. 2.5 stars. In a future where humanity is isolated, pain-free, and docile, because instead of venturing out themselves, they send surrogates, perfect mechanical counterparts, to do the work. But when a murder shatters his perfect world, an FBI agent will discover a conspiracy behind this perfect world. Another synopsis. The way the movie is shot was really done well, and Bruce Willis didn't do a bad job in this movie. Yeah, Bruce Willis didn't do a bad job, but he was given a job, and he just did that job. He's not a flaw in the film at all. The only flaw, like I said, is maybe in the slower parts you start to think about the plot holes in it, the problems with the initial premise, like I said, the eating and the shut-in part. Otherwise, I thought it was very enjoyable. 3 stars. Grade higher, 6 out of 10. Surrogates is a sci-fi film that, although never really lives up to the epic scale we see so often in this genre, still produces some good action scenes and an amazing production design to look at. It has a cast led by an action film legend, and he produces, bringing the right balance of fights and chases to really make the short film exciting. Some say it is poor, but I disagree. I felt it was enough to be considered all right, and thought it was also just about okay. And they go on. I really feel like in a review, you should be able to say most everything within one big paragraph. It shouldn't need to go on for pages, so I don't click the see more button and do that. 3.5 stars. I thought it was going to be crap due to all the negative reviews, but it actually is a pretty good film. The Surrogates concept is excellent. However, if they had not tried to make it a big bang blockbuster movie, it would have been a real classic. At the end of the film, I was not disappointed. Instead, it was thought-provoking and made me wonder what kind of world we are headed to and what would happen if all the technology was switched off tomorrow. I largely agree with this. I think this is marketed maybe by trailers and whatnot as being a Bruce Willis action movie, action sci-fi. That's not what it was attempting to deliver, and that's still my theory on why this has such a low audience review. 3 stars. An interesting story that was not capitalized in the film. 4 stars. Excellent futuristic film, worth a watch. 3.5 stars. Kind of cool, definitely my kind of movie, although it was a little disappointing. I thought it was, in its own way, a better movie for being disappointing and not trying to be totally epic or have the best HD special effects. Just a decent little flick. The Rotten Tomatoes general 2-sentence review pretty much sums it up. Lots of action, lots and lots of action. No, it wasn't lots and lots of action. A lot of things were happening. It had the pace of an action movie, perhaps, but there wasn't that much action, so I disagree. 1 star. This is an incredibly short film, however feels longer than The Lord of the Rings. Surrogates is a bore that will only put people to sleep. Again, that's coming from an action film. Obviously, you expected Die Hard Part 7 or something. I don't want to see that personally. 5 stars. Awesome movie, if it even just for the thought behind it. The content was a bonus, as I'm still a Willis fan. Why is it that a creative, thought-provoking movies get such low ratings? Because people were expecting an action movie. It is tough. I mean, even if you market it correctly, Bruce Willis is not known for this. He's known for action movies. It's hard to take the character out of Die Hard and suddenly plug him into something that's supposed to make you think. That's always going to be tough, right? 2.5 stars. Was supposed to have a deep meaning, but wasn't brought out well. Debatable. 3 stars. Why not? It is so Hollywood. You aren't going to be knocked out of your seat with any of the plot twists it has built in, but it's enjoyable as a kind of amusement park. Settle into your seat, turn your mind off for the most part, and go along for the ride. The gloomy love story with Willis and his wife gives it some good flavor. That puts it above the original Total Recall in my book. I haven't seen or thought about comparing this to Total Recall, the original. I don't believe it compares at all. In Total Recall, you're talking about exploring a virtual world, virtual memories of things. A hero that turns out to be something he didn't remember he was. Totally different. Don't see it at all. Yeah, they're both sci-fi, but otherwise they could be separate genres of sci-fi. 2.5 stars. A great premise, but poor delivery. Typical later days Bruce Willis performance. Wouldn't be in a hurry to rush out and get the DVD after viewing on Netflix. Yeah, I largely agree. It's forgettable because, I enjoyed the subplot of Bruce Willis and his wife. Now, if they had gone further into that throughout the movie, it would have been more substantial, but again, it would have taken it even further away from being any kind of action movie. It might have resulted in an even lower score on Rotten Tomatoes, if you will. But I would have wanted to see more of that. I was interested more in that dynamic. How Bruce Willis was disconnected from his wife. Could it be fixed? In the movie, it didn't show us it. It didn't give us the possibility that he could fix this. Yes, he could solve the problem of the main plot of the movie, but he couldn't really fix the problem with his wife, and that was a little disappointing to me. 4 stars. This has to be one of my favorite premises in a movie. We humans, also known as meatbags, inhabit surrogate robots hooked up to STEM chairs. We live, work, and breathe through these machines, whilst our natural bodies essentially rot away, forgotten as these robotic bodies inhabit our lives. It's Terminator meets iRobot, but with a ton of its own neat ideas and cool touches throughout. Surrogates feels very technological and futuristic, which is exactly what director Jonathan Mostow aimed for. Okay, so they're praising it with a synopsis. I still don't say 4 stars. I say 3. It peaks at 3. 3.5 stars. A new look for the sci-fi universe, but the style is rushed by the odd pacing of the story. Willis is convincing, and the directing is substantial for this kind of genre. Okay, 1.5 stars. What could have been an awesome comic adaptation into a movie? Okay, if it was from a comic of some type, I wasn't aware of that. Doesn't come across like that, doesn't feel like that, so it's certainly not trying for that tone. 3 stars, pretty decent premise. That being said, for whatever reason, I never clicked with it. It probably could have been a lot better considering the story was unique. Maybe the plainness of the surrogates brought me down. Lots of cliches here, and of course, halfway through, you knew how the movie would end up. Not bad overall. Again, pretty cool idea, and Bruce is the man. Just could have been better. I'll say one thing about the makeup and effects of the surrogates. On one hand, we get a sort of CGI de-aged Bruce Willis as his surrogate, which would work except for the fact that all of the other surrogates are obviously real people with just good makeup. So that's kind of off-putting about it. I had to overlook that initially, give that as an excuse to kind of enjoy the rest of it. That's kind of off-putting, and I would say that keeps it from being a solid 3 stars. That actually almost brings it to 2.5 for me. They should have just started out with Bruce Willis as himself and not even done the surrogate part at the beginning with him. That would have made it less off-putting, and they could have changed the plot up and made it more interesting, where the first scene is him actually not being able to use his surrogate, and that way we don't get that off-putting de-aging effect on him. That's a missed opportunity. It's easy to see that on hindsight. Again, that's why I don't put this, I say this barely hits 3 stars. 2.5 stars. 42%. It pick and mixes ideas from almost every sci-fi movie from the past 30 or so years. The robots are a combination of the ones in AI, Terminator, and iRobot. Of course, there is a Matrix element and a smattering from The Sixth Day. It is somewhat well put together and it is entertaining, but it fails to be as good as all the movies it resembles. Yeah, you could say that. I mean, if you try hard enough, you can find even maybe 20 more movies to put elements in there to make the case that it's just different movies. But that's a case of connecting the dots a little too much, and you can do that with almost every sci-fi movie. It's like that old game, The 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. If you draw the right dots, everybody's related to Kevin Bacon within 6 hops of logic. So no, I find that unfair. 2 stars. Bruce Willis gives a great performance, at least when he is the real one and not the surrogate. The film is quite short compared to other productions in the last years, but 89 minutes is okay for me. Actually, I was glad it didn't last longer. Yeah, the running time felt good to me because, yeah, if you had made it longer and perhaps fulfilled my wish of exploring more Bruce Willis, his problems with his wife, it may have really dragged down the score for other people looking for more action. So it's a hard call on that. But I think the time was right. It didn't feel too short to me. It didn't feel too long. To me, that was a wise choice. 89 minutes felt right. That's my opinion. Overall, I think it deserves to be rotten, but I would put this closer to a 50% on the audience score. It's worth seeing one time, and I'm going to leave it at that, and I will see you again on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.